They say you can't hold a memory in your hands, but they're wrong, for me. My mother's entire existence, her laughter, her grace, her quiet strength, her sadness, it was all captured in 88 ivory and ebony keys. Her piano wasn't just a piece of furniture in our living room, it was the heart of our home. It was the last, most tangible piece of her I had left. And my new stepmother wanted to sell it for scrap. If you've ever had to fight for a memory, if you've ever had someone try to tell you that something precious to you is worthless, then you're going to want to hear this. Hit that like and subscribe button. You guys, because this is the story of how a dusty old piano became the battlefield for my family's entire history, and how the woman who tried to destroy my past accidentally handed me the keys to my future. My mother, Eleanor, was a concert pianist before she met my father. She gave up a promising career to raise me, but she never gave up the music. Our house was always filled with the sound of Chopin nocturnes and Debussy's Clair de Lune. The piano, a beautiful century-old Steinway grand with a rich mahogany finish, was her sanctuary. It had a tiny, crescent-shaped scratch on the fallboard from where I'd dropped a toy truck as a toddler. And one of the C-sharp keys had a faint, yellowed tint that no one else would notice, but I knew it was from the countless times she'd rested her teacup there. It was a map of our life together. When I was little, I'd sit on the bench next to her, my head resting on her thigh, and watch her long, elegant fingers dance across the keys. She taught me how to play. Her patience as endless as her love. "Feel the music, Lily," she would whisper. Her voice as soft as the pedal she was pressing. "Don't just play the notes. Tell the story." For my mother, the piano was a language, a way to say all the things that words couldn't capture. When she got sick, the music started to fade. The chemotherapy weakened her hands, but she would still come and sit at the piano, her fingers gently tracing the keys she could no longer press with force. In her final year, the house fell silent. The piano stood like a magnificent, sleeping beast in the living room, waiting for a touch that would never come again. After she passed, the silence was unbearable. The piano became my only connection to her. On nights when the grief was a physical weight on my chest, I would go downstairs, sit on the familiar worn bench, and play her favorite pieces. I'd close my eyes, and for a few minutes, I could almost feel her sitting next to me, could almost smell her faint lavender scent. It wasn't just a piano. It was my mother's ghost. It was my heart. My father grieved in his own way. He was a good man, but a man lost in a sea of sorrow he didn't know how to navigate. My mother had been his anchor, his everything, and his way of dealing with the gaping hole she left behind was to try and fill it as quickly as possible. He met Brenda 6 months after my mother's funeral. Brenda was the opposite of my mother in every conceivable way. Where my mom was quiet grace, Brenda was loud opinion. Where my mom loved antiques and the stories they held, Brenda loved sharp lines, chrome, and anything that looked like it belonged in a modern art gallery. Minus the art, she was a whirlwind of energy, a woman who didn't just enter a room, she conquered it, and she conquered my father with terrifying speed. Less than a year after my mother died, they were married. I was still reeling from the loss of my mom, and suddenly there was another woman sleeping in her bed, wearing her favorite apron in the kitchen, and, worst of all, redecorating her house. "We need to brighten this place up," Frank she'd announced one weekend, waving a paint swatch book like a general's baton. "All this dark wood and heavy drapery. It's so depressing." So began the great erasure. The warm, cream-colored walls of the living room my mother had loved were painted a stark, sterile gray, the comfortable. Overstuffed armchair where my mom used to read was replaced by a sleek, leather and chrome thing that looked beautiful but was impossible to get comfortable in. One by one, the little pieces of my mother were being packed away, painted over, and replaced. I tried to be understanding. I told myself my dad deserved to be happy. I told myself this was Brenda's house now, too. I swallowed my objections and my grief, and I smiled politely when she showed off her new minimalist vases or her abstract art print that looked like a paint can had exploded. Have you ever had to do that? Just smile and nod while your heart is breaking. It's a special kind of torture, but there was one thing I couldn't be quiet about. The piano. It stood in the living room, a majestic, dark wood monument to a time Brenda was determined to forget. It clashed horribly with her new gray and chrome aesthetic. It took up, in her words, a ridiculous amount of space. It was the ghost she couldn't exorcise, and she hated it. The first attack was subtle. "You know, Frank," she said one evening, looking at the piano with a thinly veiled disgust. "The acoustics in this room are all wrong for an instrument like that. It just echoes. It must be so unpleasant for Lily when she plays." I was sitting right there. "I think it sounds beautiful," I said quietly. Brenda gave me a tight, pitying smile. "Oh, honey, of course you do. It has sentimental value. But objectively, it's just not in the right space." My father, desperate to avoid a conflict, just grunted from behind his newspaper. The subject was dropped, but a warning shot had been fired. The second attack was more direct. She waited until my dad was out of the room. "Lily," she began, sitting next to me on her uncomfortable new sofa, "I was thinking about you. You love music so much, which is just wonderful. But that old thing," she gestured at the piano with a dismissive wave of her hand. "It's a dinosaur. The keys are yellowed. The wood is all scratched. It must cost a fortune just to keep it tuned." "Right. It was my mother's," I said, my voice cold. "I know, sweetie, and that's lovely. But memories are in the heart, not in objects. Especially not in objects that are taking up half the living room." She leaned in, her voice becoming conspiratorial and sweet, which was always her most dangerous mode. "I saw the most wonderful thing online. A digital keyboard. It has hundreds of sounds. You can play with headphones so you don't disturb anyone, and it would fit perfectly in your old bedroom upstairs. We could even get a little stand for it." She was looking at me with such bright, false sincerity. She thought she was being clever, offering me a compromise. "No, thank you, Brenda," I said. Standing up, "I prefer this one." Her face hardened for a split second before the saccharine smile returned. "Well, just think about it. Honey, we want you to be happy." The final assault, the one that started this whole story, came a week later. It was the inciting incident, the moment that drew the battle lines. Brenda caught me just as I was about to leave for a weekend trip to visit a friend. "Lily, sweetie, I'm so glad I caught you," she chirped. She was holding a tablet. Her face lit up with a triumphant glow. "I've solved our little piano problem." My stomach dropped. "It's not a problem. Brenda." "Oh, don't be silly. It's a huge problem, but look." She shoved the tablet in my face. It was open to a Craigslist ad. "There's a man, a scrap metal dealer, who will come and haul away old pianos for free. He even pays a little for the metal parts, like the harp. He said he can give us $100 for it." I stared at her, speechless. The audacity of it, the sheer, breathtaking disrespect. She wanted to sell my mother's soul for $100. "He could come on Monday," she continued, oblivious to the fury building inside me. "That way, it'll be gone when you get back, and you won't have to be upset by seeing it go. Then we can go shopping for that nice new sectional sofa I showed you." I finally found my voice. No, it was just one word, but I packed all of my grief and anger and love for my mother into it. Brenda's smile faltered. "No, no," I repeated, my voice shaking now. "You will not sell my mother's piano. It is not yours to sell. It is not moving. It is staying right where it is. Do you understand me?" Her face turned an ugly shade of red. "Now, you listen to me, young lady." Just then, my father walked into the room. "What's all the shouting about?" Brenda immediately transformed. Her face crumpled, and tears welled up in her eyes. It was a masterful performance. "Oh, Frank," she whimpered, clutching his arm. "I was just trying to do something nice. I found a way to clear up some space. And Lily? She just yelled at me." My father looked at me, his face a mask of disappointment. "Clara," he said, using my full name, which he only did when he was deeply displeased. "Brenda is just trying to make this house a home for all of us. It's been over a year. You need to learn to let go of the past. It's just a piano. It's just a piano." Of all the things he could have said, that was the one that broke me. It wasn't just a piano. It was my childhood. It was my mother's hands. It was the last piece of her that this woman hadn't managed to paint over or throw away. And my own father had just dismissed it as an object. "I have to go," I said. My voice thick with tears I refused to let them see. I'm going to be late. I turned and walked out the door, not looking back. As I drove away, my father's words echoed in my head. It's just a piano. He was wrong. It wasn't just a piano. He had no idea what it really was. My mother had made sure of that. As I merged onto the highway, I whispered to myself, a promise to my mother's memory. It's not just a piano, it's everything. Brenda thought she was fighting me for a piece of furniture. She had no idea she was trying to take the keys to a kingdom. And I knew, in that moment, that this was a war I could not afford to lose. That weekend trip away from the house was supposed to be a relief. A chance to breathe air that wasn't thick with unspoken tension and the cloying scent of Brenda's potpourri. But I couldn't relax. I spent most of Saturday staring at my phone, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. I'd text my dad a casual, "Hey, how's everything going?" and wait with bated breath for the reply. "Fine, Lily, enjoy your weekend." An hour later, I'd try again, just making sure everything's okay at the house. "Everything is fine. Please stop worrying." He thought I was being a neurotic, clingy daughter. He had no idea I wasn't worried about him. I was worried about the 6-foot, 900-pound mahogany and ivory member of our family that couldn't speak up for itself. The battle for the piano had begun, and I knew my weekend away was just a temporary ceasefire, not a truce. When I got back on Sunday night, the first thing I did was walk into the living room. The piano was still there, a silent, majestic sentinel in the corner. I ran my hand over its smooth, cool surface and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for 48 hours. It was safe, for now. Brenda, it turned out, was smarter than I had given her credit for. She knew a direct assault wouldn't work. I had drawn a line in the sand, and she knew that openly crossing it would make her look like the villain, even to my conflict-avoidant father. So, she changed tactics. She began a campaign of psychological warfare, a death by 1,000 paper cuts, designed to make the piano's existence in her house an infuriating, inconvenient, and undeniable problem. Have you ever been gaslit? It's a wild ride. It's when someone methodically and deliberately messes with your reality and then makes you feel like you're the crazy one for noticing. Brenda, I discovered, was a grandmaster of the art. It started a week later. I came over for dinner, and there, on the polished mahogany lid of the piano, was a large, wet ring from the bottom of a vase. A huge, ostentatious glass vase filled with lilies, you guys, which are notorious for dropping pollen that stains everything it touches. "Oh my God, Brenda," I gasped, rushing over with a napkin. "There's a water ring on the piano." Brenda looked up from her magazine, her face a perfect mask of innocent surprise. "Oh, goodness, is there? Oh, that's terrible. Those flowers must have sweated." She came over, dabbing at it with a cloth. "You see, this is what I mean. Lily, these old wood finishes are so fussy. You can't put anything on them. It makes decorating so difficult. See what she did there? It wasn't her fault for putting a wet vase on a priceless antique. It was the piano's fault for being so fussy." A few weeks after that, it was a glass of red wine. One of her friends was over, and there was a terrible accident. A splash of deep red Cabernet landed just near the keyboard. It didn't hit the keys, but it stained the wood right beside them. I spent an hour online, researching how to safely remove a wine stain from antique wood veneer, while Brenda fluttered around me, clucking her tongue. "I am so sorry, Lily," she'd said, wringing her hands. "Barbara is just so clumsy sometimes. Honestly, having this thing here is a liability. I'm constantly worried someone is going to damage it, again." The piano was the problem, the liability, the source of all trouble. My father, of course, just patted her shoulder and said, "It was an accident. Honey, don't worry about it." He refused to see it. He refused to see the pattern, the calculated carelessness. His desperation for a peaceful, happy new life had made him willfully blind. Our phone calls became strained. "Dad, Brenda keeps putting things on the piano. It's getting damaged." "Lily, she's not doing it on purpose. It's a big piece of furniture. People are going to set things down. You're being overly sensitive." "It's not just a piece of furniture. It was Mom's. I know who it belonged to," he'd say, his voice cold and heavy with annoyance. I was married to her for 30 years. You don't need to remind me. Maybe if you accepted that we all need to move on, you wouldn't get so worked up over a little water ring. Brenda is my wife now. This is her house, too. You need to make an effort. I was the one who needed to make an effort. I, the daughter who was watching her mother's memory be systematically erased by 1,000 tiny, deniable acts of aggression, was the one who wasn't trying hard enough. It was maddening. I felt like I was losing my mind, constantly fighting a battle no one else would even acknowledge was happening. I was the keeper of a memory in a house that was suffering from a terminal case of amnesia. This slow, grinding war of attrition went on for 6 months. I started taking pictures of the piano every time I visited, documenting every new scratch, every faint stain. I became the neurotic curator of a one-piece museum that everyone else wanted to tear down. The breaking point was disguised as a wonderful opportunity. I worked as an independent art historian and consultant. My cover story for my family was that I managed a small private gallery. An actual, legitimate opportunity came up, a chance to go to Florence for 3 weeks to help authenticate a newly discovered collection of Renaissance drawings. It was a dream job, but it meant leaving the piano unguarded for 3 weeks. The thought filled me with a cold, primal dread. 3 weeks. Oh, how wonderful for you, Lily Brenda had exclaimed when I told them at dinner. Her smile was a little too wide, her eyes a little too bright. My internal alarms started screaming. That's fantastic news, sweetie, my dad said, genuinely happy for me. I'm a little worried about being away for that long, I said, looking at my dad, trying to send him a telepathic message. Nonsense, Brenda chirped. Your father and I will be perfectly fine here. You go and have the time of your life. That night, after Brenda had gone to bed, I caught my father in the kitchen. Dad, I said, my voice low, you have to promise me something. He sighed, that weary sigh I had come to hate. Lily, if this is about the piano again. It is, I said, my voice pleading. Please, just for the 3 weeks I'm gone, can you just make sure nothing happens to it? No vases, no wine glasses, no anything. Just keep an eye on it for me, please. He looked at me, and for a second, I thought I saw a flicker of the old, compassionate dad I remembered, but it was gone in an instant, replaced by exasperation. For heaven's sake, Lily, it is a piano, a large, inanimate object made of wood. It will be fine, he said, his voice clipped with annoyance. Brenda isn't some monster out to destroy your mother's memory. She's a good woman. Now, go on your trip. Go to Italy. Try to have some fun for once, and stop being so morbid. Morbid, that's what he called it. My love for my mother, my desire to protect the last piece of her I had left, was morbid. I went on the trip, but I couldn't enjoy it. I walked through the Uffizi Gallery, surrounded by the masterpieces of Botticelli and Leonardo da Vinci. But all I could think about was the beautiful, vulnerable masterpiece sitting in my living room back home. I'd call home every few days. My dad's answers were always short, a little annoyed. How's everything? Fine. Lily? The house is okay. The living room is okay. The house is fine. Stop worrying. I tried to believe him, but on the last day of my trip, as I was packing my bags in my small Florentine hotel room, a wave of dread so powerful washed over me that I had to sit down. It was a physical sensation, a cold fist clenching in my gut. I just knew something was wrong. The flight home was the longest 9 hours of my life. I didn't watch a movie. I didn't sleep. I just stared at the flight map on the screen in front of me, watching the little airplane icon crawl across the Atlantic, my anxiety growing with every passing mile. I landed at JFK, took a taxi home, and the entire ride. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I let myself into the house with my key. It was quiet. My dad and Brenda were out. I dropped my bags in the hallway and walked, my steps hesitant, towards the living room. I stood in the doorway, and I looked. The room was different. The new, gray sectional sofa Brenda wanted was there. It was huge, taking up most of the wall. On the wall where the sofa used to be, there was a new, ridiculously large flat-screen television. And the corner where the piano had stood for my entire life, was empty. It wasn't just empty space. It was a wound, a gaping, silent, screaming hole in the heart of my home. in the center of my memory. I stood there, staring at the empty patch of hardwood floor, and I felt the world tilt off its axis. She had done it while I was gone. She had finally done it. She had won for the entire 9-hour flight back from Florence. A single, irrational prayer looped in my mind. Please let me be wrong. Please let me be crazy. Please let the piano be there. I was bargaining with a universe that I already knew had made its decision. The dread that had been a cold fist in my gut had solidified into a block of ice. I knew what I was going to find, or rather, what I wasn't going to find. But hope is a stubborn, stupid thing. I let myself into the quiet house, my suitcase wheels echoing on the polished hardwood floor of the foyer. I dropped my bags. I didn't call out, I just walked, my feet moving as if through water, toward the living room. I stopped in the doorway, my hand gripping the frame for support, and I looked at the wound. That's the only way I can describe it. The empty space in the corner of the room wasn't just an absence of furniture, it was a physical, gaping wound in the heart of my childhood home. The hardwood floor where the piano's heavy legs had rested for 50 years was a shade lighter than the surrounding wood, a pale, ghost-like outline of what had been stolen. The afternoon sun streamed through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the empty air where music used to live. The silence was the loudest thing I had ever heard. I stood there for I don't know how long. Time seemed to warp and stretch. I was a statue, frozen in the doorway, my mind refusing to process the violation. My mother's piano was gone. Her ghost was gone. The heart of our home had been ripped out and discarded. The sound of a car pulling into the driveway broke the spell. A few moments later, the front door opened, and I heard Brenda's cheerful, grating laugh. And I told her, if you're going to spend that much on a handbag, it should at least be real leather, she was saying to my father. They walked into the foyer, flushed from an afternoon out. Brenda was carrying a new shopping bag from a high-end department store. She saw me standing in the doorway and her face lit up. Lily, you're back. Welcome home, sweetie. How was Italy? She swept into the living room, not even waiting for an answer. What do you think? She said, gesturing with a grand flourish at her new, enormous, gray sectional sofa. Isn't it 1,000 times better? So much more light and space in here now. It really opens up the room. I just stared at her. My throat was so tight. I couldn't form words. My father came up behind me, patting my shoulder. Welcome back. Kiddo, did you have a good trip? I finally found my voice. It came out as a ragged whisper. Where is it? Brenda, who was busy fluffing a throw pillow, looked over at me. Where is what? Honey. The piano, I said, my voice cracking. Where is my mother's piano? Brenda let out a little, tinkling laugh, as if I'd asked the silliest question in the world. You guys, I will never, for as long as I live, forget the casual, cheerful cruelty of her next words. Oh, that old thing I told you I was going to take care of it, she said, beaming with pride, as if she had done me a massive favor. I found a wonderful man on Craigslist, a scrap metal dealer. He came and hauled it away while you were gone. So efficient, he even gave me $100 for it. Can you believe it? I was thinking we could use it to buy that lovely floor lamp we saw at Crate and Barrel. $100 for a lamp. The world went red at the edges. The grief, the anger, the frustration I had been swallowing for months. It all erupted out of me in a single, guttural roar. Have you ever been so angry, so hurt, that a sound just rips out of your throat? A sound you didn't even know you were capable of making. That was me. You sold it for scrap. My voice didn't sound like my own. It was raw, shaking with a fury so profound it scared me. Brenda's cheerful expression vanished, replaced by shock and then indignation. Well, yes, what did you expect? It was falling apart. Lily, it was junk. It wasn't junk, I screamed, taking a step into the room. It was my mother's. It was everything I had left of her, and you sold her memory for $100. Now, hold on, Brenda said, her voice turning sharp and defensive. There is no need to raise your voice at me in my own home. It was an old, ugly piece of furniture, and it's gone. You need to get over it. That's when my father stepped in. He didn't step in to comfort his grieving daughter. He didn't step in to question his new wife's appalling lack of empathy. He stepped in front of Brenda, shielding her from me, as if I were the one on the attack. "Clara, that is enough," he said, his voice a stern command. "You will not speak to my wife that way." I stared at him, my heart fracturing into a million pieces. My wife. He had chosen. "Dad," I whispered. The fight draining out of me, replaced by a cold, hollowing despair. "She sold Mom's piano for scrap metal." "I know," he said, his face hard. "And it's done. We talked about this. It was an old piano. It was taking up space. Brenda was just trying to improve the house for all of us. You are being hysterical over a piece of furniture. You need to accept it and move on." Move on. He wanted me to move on. He had stood by and let this woman desecrate the most sacred object in our family, the last bastion of my mother's presence. And he was telling me to move on. He wasn't just willfully blind anymore. He was an active participant in the erasure. He was holding the paintbrush for her. The fury vanished, leaving behind a grief so vast and empty it was like a black hole. In that moment, I lost more than a piano. I lost my father. The man who had raised me, who had loved my mother, was gone. In his place was this stranger, this hollow man who would rather defend his new wife's petty tyranny than his own daughter's heart. I was an orphan all over again. I didn't say another word. There was nothing left to say. I turned my back on them, on the new gray sofa and the empty space where my heart used to be. And I walked up the stairs to my old bedroom. I closed the door, leaned against it, and slid down to the floor. The tears finally came, silent and agonizing. I wept for my mother. I wept for the beautiful, soulful instrument that was probably, at that very moment, being smashed to pieces by a man with a sledgehammer. And I wept for the father I had just lost. I lay on the floor for hours, listening to the muffled sounds of their lives continuing downstairs, their quiet conversation, the sound of the television, the clink of glasses. My world had ended, and they were watching TV. As the sun went down and my room grew dark, something began to shift inside me. The all-consuming grief started to recede, leaving behind a cold, hard stone of resolve in my stomach. I sat up, my mind strangely clear. I was thinking about my mother. I was thinking about the last week of her life, in the hospice. Her hands were too weak to play anymore, but she had made me sit with her, her voice a reedy whisper. What had she said? I had been so lost in my own preemptive grief that the words had been a blur, but now, in the desolate quiet, they started to come back to me. She had made me promise. "Promise me, Lily," she had whispered, her grip surprisingly strong on my hand. "Promise me you'll always take care of the piano. It's more than just wood and wire. It's our story." I had promised, of course. "Don't ever let them take it from you," she'd insisted, her eyes locking onto mine with a sudden, fierce intensity. "No matter what. The key, Lily, the key is in the song. The key is in the song." At the time, I thought she was being poetic. Delirious from the medication, I thought she meant the emotional key, the key to her memory. But now, sitting on the floor of my childhood bedroom, in a house that no longer felt like home, her words took on a new, urgent, and terrifying meaning. It wasn't a metaphor. My grief wasn't gone. But now, it had a new companion, a frantic, desperate sense of purpose. Brenda hadn't just sold a piece of furniture for scrap. She had sold a secret. And I had a sudden, terrifying premonition that I was in a race against a man with a sledgehammer and $100 bill to get it back. I stood up. I walked to my closet and pulled out an overnight bag. I threw in a change of clothes, my laptop, and my wallet. I walked out of my room and down the stairs. My father and Brenda were on the sofa, watching a movie. They looked up as I walked past. "Where are you going?" my father asked, a flicker of concern finally crossing his face. "Out," I said, my voice flat. I didn't say goodbye. I walked out the front door, got into my car, and pulled out of the driveway without looking back. I didn't know where the scrap dealer was. I didn't know his name. I had nothing but a $100 transaction and a cryptic memory to go on. But as I drove away from the house that was once my home, one thought consumed me. I had to find that piano. My life, and my mother's legacy, depended on it. The drive away from my childhood home was a blur of streetlights and fury. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. For the first 10 minutes, The only thoughts in my head were a chaotic storm of rage and grief. How could he? How could she scrap metal? $100. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute. It felt like a physical illness. But as the miles passed, the white-hot rage began to cool, crystallizing into something else, something cold, sharp, and terrifyingly clear. It was purpose. It was the memory of my mother's voice, a reedy whisper from her hospice bed, a memory I had buried under layers of grief because it was too painful to touch. Until now, okay, so you guys are probably thinking, it's a piano, a beautiful, sentimental piano, but still just a piano. Why the life or death panic? Well, here's the part of the story I've never told anyone. Not my dad, not Brenda, not even my closest friends. This is the secret my mom and I shared, and the secret Brenda had just, in her ignorant greed, sold for the price of a floor lamp. You see, my mother's family, the Jensens, were not like my father's family. They weren't flashy. They didn't have a well-known name. They were quiet, unassuming people from the Midwest. My maternal grandfather was a brilliant engineer who had invented and patented a specific type of high-efficiency water pump used in agriculture. He made a quiet fortune, not through stocks or social climbing, but through sheer ingenuity, and he was a deeply cautious man. He'd seen friends lose everything in market crashes and bad divorces. He didn't trust banks, and he didn't trust anyone outside his bloodline. When he passed, he left his entire legacy to my mother, his only child, and she, in turn, created a plan to protect it for me. She'd seen the way my father was so easily impressed by superficial things, how he could be swayed. She worried that if she passed, he might remarry, and she wanted to ensure that her family's legacy, my legacy, was safe. I remember the conversation like it was yesterday. It was one of her last good days. The sunlight was streaming into her hospice room, and she was lucid, her eyes sharp and clear. "Lily," she'd whispered, pulling me close, "promise me you'll take care of the piano." "Of course, Mom, always," I'd said, my throat tight. "No, listen to me," she insisted, her grip on my hand surprisingly strong. "It's more than just a piano. It's a safe. It's our story, your grandfather. He was a clever man. He built a vault, a real one, and the keys are in the piano." I must have looked at her like she was delirious. "I'm serious, baby," she said. "There are 2 keys. One is real, one is in the music. Under the G-sharp 2 octaves above middle C. The wood is loose. Your grandfather designed it. It's a pressure lock. Press it 3 times, and a small compartment will open in the leg of the piano, inside. You'll find a key, a physical key to a safe deposit box." My mind was reeling. A secret compartment, a key. "But the key is useless without the passcode," she continued, her breathing becoming a little more labored. "And the passcode is our song." Our song. It was a simple lullaby she had composed for me when I was a baby, a tune I could play in my sleep. I kept the original sheet music, the one I wrote by hand. In the piano bench, she whispered, "On that music." I carved tiny numbers into the stems of certain notes. It looks like imperfections in the ink, unless you know where to look. The first note of every bar. That sequence of numbers is the code to the vault, the key and the song. "Lily, you need both. Promise me you'll remember." I promised. And then, in the haze of grief that followed, I had buried that memory. It felt like a fairy tale, something a dying mother would tell her daughter to comfort her. It didn't seem real. Until now, it was the only thing that was real. My first task was to find the scrap dealer. I pulled over into a gas station parking lot, my hands shaking as I pulled out my phone. I had to call my father. I had to swallow my pride and my rage and speak to the man who had just stood by and co-signed the destruction of my entire world. I took a deep breath and dialed. He answered on the second ring, his voice wary. "Clara." "Dad," I said. My voice clipped. "All business. I need the name and number of the man who took the piano." Why, Lily? What are you planning on doing?" "Don't go and cause a scene." "I am not going to cause a scene," I said through clenched teeth. "I need the number. Now." "I don't have it. Brenda handled it. It was some ad on Craigslist." "Of course, Brenda. Put her on the phone," I commanded. There was a muffled conversation, And then Brenda's hesitant voice came on the line. Lily, honey, are you okay? I need the number of the scrap dealer. Brenda, I said, my voice dangerously calm. Oh, I don't know if I still have it. I just replied to the ad. Find it, I said. Find it now. Go into your computer's browser history. Check your sent emails. I don't care how you do it. You have 5 minutes to text me that number. Or I swear to you, I will make your life a living hell. It was the first time I had ever threatened anyone in my life. And you know what? It felt good. A different kind of silence followed, and then a meek, okay, Lily. 3 minutes later, a text message came through with a name, Gary's Hauling and Scrap, and a phone number. I called immediately. A gruff voice answered. Yeah. Hello, my name is Lily Anderson. I believe you picked up a grand piano from my father's house in Greenwich yesterday. Yeah, maybe. I haul a lot of junk. Lady, what about it? My heart was hammering. I need to get it back. It was a mistake. I'll pay you for your time. The man laughed. A harsh, gravelly sound. Get it back, lady. It's scrap. It's probably already been broken down. The wood goes to the dump. The metal harp goes to the smelter. That's how it works. The world tilted. No, I whispered. No. You can't have. It was a Steinway. It was valuable. A valuable piece of junk. He grunted. Look, I don't have it anymore. End of story. He was about to hang up. Wait, I yelled, my voice cracking with desperation. Who has it? You said the wood goes to the dump. Did you take it there? Which dump? There was a long-suffering sigh on the other end. Look, lady, you're becoming a real pain. I don't deal with wood. Okay. Takes up too much space. My cousin. Sal. He's got a big warehouse over in the industrial park. He likes old furniture, refinishes it or whatever. I gave it to him for $100 just to get it off my truck. He probably already took a sledgehammer to it. My heart seized, but it was a lead, a tiny, fragile thread of hope. Your cousin, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. What's the name of his business? Where is his warehouse? Why the hell should I tell you? I didn't hesitate. Because if you don't, I will report your business to every single state and federal agency I can think of. I will have you audited. I will make it my life's mission to ensure you can never haul another piece of scrap in this state again. Now give me the address. There was a moment of stunned silence, and then he grumbled an address in a part of the city I'd never even heard of. I scribbled it down on a napkin. And Sal's business name. He ain't got a name. It's just Sal's place. It's a giant. Falling down warehouse at the end of the road. You can't miss it. Now leave me alone. He hung up. I threw the car into gear and sped out of the gas station, my GPS directing me towards the industrial park. The drive was a blur of warehouses and chain-link fences. It was a forgotten part of the city, a place where things went to die. And my mother's piano was one of them, the entire time. A frantic prayer looped in my head. Please be whole. Please be whole. Please be whole. I found it at the very end of a dead-end street. Sal's place was an understatement. It was a colossal, rust-colored warehouse that looked like it had survived a war. The yard was a graveyard of discarded furniture stacks of old chairs, headless dressers, piles of broken table legs. It was a place of endings. I parked the car and walked towards the huge, open bay door. The inside was cavernous and dusty, with shafts of light cutting through the grime on the high windows. It smelled of sawdust, turpentine, and decay. And in the center of the vast space, surrounded by a chaotic landscape of furniture carcasses, I saw it. My mother's piano. It was covered in a dusty tarp, but the shape was unmistakable. It was whole. I felt tears of raw, unadulterated relief stream down my face. I had found it. A man emerged from the shadows, wiping his hands on a greasy rag. He was old, wiry, with a cloud of white hair and eyes that were startlingly blue. Can I help you? He asked, his voice raspy. I'm here about the piano, I said, gesturing towards the tarp. The Steinway grand. Your cousin Gary brought it in yesterday. The old man's eyes narrowed. Yeah, what about it? I need to buy it back from you, I said. It was sold by mistake. It's my family's. He let out a dry chuckle. Is that so? Well, your family's got terrible taste. Then, selling a pre-war Steinway for scrap. The fool who brought it here didn't know what he had. But I do. He walked over and pulled the tarp off with a flourish. There it was. My beautiful, wounded piano. There was a new, deep gash on one of the legs from the move, but it was intact. The action's a little sticky, and the finish is shot to hell, he said, running a loving hand over the wood, but the soundboard is solid, the harp is intact. The bones on this thing are magnificent. A piano like this isn't junk, sweetheart, it's a resurrection waiting to happen. I know, I whispered. Please? How much do you want for it? I'll pay anything. He looked at me, his blue eyes sharp and assessing. He saw the desperation on my face, the tear tracks on my cheeks. He knew he had me. It's gonna cost you, he said slowly. I already had plans for this beauty. It was going to be my winter project. He named a price. It was high, thousands of dollars, enough to make a normal person walk away. But I wasn't a normal person, not anymore. And this wasn't just a piano. I'll take it, I said without hesitating, but I need to get something from it, right now. His eyebrows shot up. Get something what? You leave your wallet in there. Something like that, I said. The quest wasn't over. The piano was safe from destruction, but it was still here, in this dusty purgatory. And I was standing in front of a shrewd old man who had no idea that he was the gatekeeper to my entire future. Sal, the wiry old man with the startlingly blue eyes, crossed his arms over his chest. He looked from me to the piano and back again. A shrewd, calculating expression on his face. He had named his price, a number that was designed to be a starting point for a long, drawn-out haggle. He expected me to be shocked, to argue, to try and talk him down. He was a craftsman, but he was also a businessman who knew he had a desperate customer on the hook. But I wasn't a normal customer, and this wasn't a normal negotiation. I didn't have time to haggle. Every minute that piano sat in his dusty, forgotten warehouse was a minute where something could go wrong. A rat could chew through the sheet music. An employee could get clumsy and knock the secret compartment loose. My father or Brenda could somehow track me here. Time was a luxury I didn't have. Done, I said. The speed of my acceptance clearly surprised him. His eyebrows shot up. Done just like that. You don't even want a dicker. I want the piano, I said simply. I'll pay your price, but I have one condition. He narrowed his eyes. There's always a catch. What is it? I need to look inside it before I pay you, I said, trying to keep my voice even. There are some personal effects. Sheet music that belonged to my mother. I just want to make sure it's still there. It's the only reason I want the piano back. The sentimental value. I hated lying, but I could feel my mother's warning echoing in my ears. She had built this fortress of secrets for a reason. I couldn't risk revealing anything to a stranger. No matter how much he loved old wood. Sal grunted, stroking his chin. He was suspicious. I could see the gears turning in his head. What could possibly be inside an old piano that was worth this much money to this desperate-looking young woman? Lady, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, he started. It's not a game, I cut in. My voice firm but polite. It's my mother's handwritten music. It's worthless to anyone but me. And there's a key that's sometimes loose inside the action. It can fall out and rattle during a move. I just want to secure it before I arrange for professional movers. It was a plausible lie. Plausible enough. Anyway, he stared at me for a long moment, his blue eyes searching my face. I met his gaze without flinching, channeling every ounce of my will into looking like a daughter grieving over a sentimental object, and not a woman on the verge of uncovering a dynastic fortune. All right, he finally sighed, waving a dismissive hand. Fine. Go on, check your junk. But I'm watching you. You try anything funny, and the deal's off. Thank you, I breathed, a wave of relief washing over me. He led me over to the piano, pulling a single, bare light bulb on a long cord closer, so it hung directly over the instrument, casting long, dancing shadows across the dusty warehouse. It felt like a spotlight on a stage. My hands were shaking so bad. You guys, I was trying to look calm, but on the inside, my heart was a trapped bird, beating against my ribs. Sal stood a few feet away, arms crossed, watching me like a hawk. The first test, the piano bench, the sheet music. I lifted the heavy lid. The faint, familiar scent of old paper and cedar filled the air. It was my mother's smell. My eyes immediately started to well up. And this time, the tears weren't an act. The bench was filled with stacks of old music books, Bach, Beethoven, Mozart. I began sifting through them, my fingers trembling. My heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. What if it's not here? What if Brenda threw it all out before Gary picked it up? I moved a thick book of Chopin etudes, and there it was. Underneath everything, it wasn't a book. It was a simple, leather-bound portfolio, tied with a faded ribbon. My mother's handwriting was on the cover. Lily's Lullaby. I had to physically stop myself from sobbing out loud. I clutched the portfolio to my chest for a second. Then, remembering Sal was watching, I quickly composed myself. I gave him a small, watery smile. "Found it," I said, my voice thick. "This is it." I tucked the portfolio carefully into my oversized purse. Step 1, complete. Now for the hard part, the key. I turned my attention to the piano itself. I ran my hand over the keys, the ivory cool and smooth beneath my fingertips. "Just want to check the action," I mumbled, more to myself than to him. I started playing a simple scale, my movements deliberately clumsy. The notes that came out were dusty and slightly out of tune, but they were the most beautiful sound in the world. The piano was alive. My mother's instructions had been specific. The G sharp 2 octaves above middle C. My eyes scanned the keyboard. I found middle C. I moved up. There it was. It looked just like all the others. I pressed it. A dull, flat note echoed in the warehouse. Nothing. My breath caught in my throat. Did I remember it wrong? Was it a different key? Then I remembered the other part of her instruction. Press it 3 times. A pressure lock? This was going to be tricky. Sal was still watching me intently. I couldn't just repeatedly press the same key over and over. I needed a distraction. I needed a reason to be touching that specific key. I started playing the opening bars of Clair de Lune. It was one of my mother's favorites, and one of the few pieces I could still play from memory. My playing was rusty, full of mistakes, but the melody filled the dusty space. I played the first few phrases, my fingers getting reacquainted with the feel of the instrument. Then, I reached the part of the song that contained the G sharp. As my finger pressed down on it, I deliberately played the wrong chord with my left hand, creating a jarring, dissonant sound. "Ah, shoot," I said. Feigning frustration, I stopped playing. I pressed the G sharp again. By itself, this key feels sticky. I said to Sal, "You were right about the action. 1. He grunted. "Told ya, needs work." I pressed it again, a little harder, as if trying to unstick it. "Yeah, it's really catching on something." 2. I looked at him. Mind if I try to see what it is before he could answer? I pressed it a 3rd time, hard and fast. 3. I heard it, a tiny, almost imperceptible click from deep within the body of the piano. It was a sound so faint, it could have been a mouse scurrying in the rafters, but to me, it was as loud as a gunshot. Sal's eyes narrowed. What was that? My heart leaped into my throat. What I didn't hear anything? It's just this sticky key. I quickly played a few surrounding notes to cover. I had to get to the leg of the piano. Now, the front right leg, my mother had said. Thinking fast, I slid off the bench and pretended to stumble, knocking my purse off my shoulder. Its contents, my wallet, my keys. A lipstick spilled onto the dusty floor right next to the piano leg. "Oh, for heaven's sake, I am so clumsy," I said, embarrassed. "Watch the merchandise, lady," Sal grumbled. I knelt down, my back to him, pretending to gather my things. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. "Sorry, just let me get my stuff." I fumbled for my wallet, my keys, and then, under the cover of my own body, my fingers brushed against the ornate carving on the front right leg of the piano. I felt for a seam, and there it was, a tiny hairline crack that hadn't been there before. The compartment. My fingers slipped inside. They brushed against cold, hard metal, the key. I wrapped my hand around it, my palm closing over its intricate shape. I quickly scooped up the rest of my things, shoved them back in my purse, and stood up. My face flushed. I was sure he could hear my heart pounding from across the room. "Okay," I said, taking a deep, shaky breath. "Everything seems to be in order. I'll take it." I walked over to him. Pulling my checkbook from my purse, I had come prepared. with a cashier's check from a general-purpose savings account, a buffer account that couldn't be traced back to the main trust. I endorsed it over to him. He took the check, looked at the amount, and a slow, satisfied smile spread across his face. "Pleasure doing business with you, miss," he said. "I'll have a professional art moving company contact you tomorrow to arrange for pickup," I said. My voice all business now. "They are fully insured." "You do that," he said, folding the check and tucking it into his shirt pocket. I turned and walked towards the bay door, out into the fresh, cool air. I didn't run. I walked, but every step was an effort of will. Once I was back in the safety of my car, I locked the doors, rested my forehead against the steering wheel, and let out a sob of pure, unadulterated relief. I reached into my purse. My fingers closed around the two objects. I pulled them out, the leather portfolio with my mother's handwritten music, and the key. The key was heavy, made of old brass, with an ornate, filigreed head and a number stamped onto it, 317. The key to a safe deposit box. I drove not to my apartment, but to a small, anonymous hotel downtown. I couldn't go home. I couldn't risk my father or Brenda showing up. I needed a safe, neutral space, in the sterile quiet of the hotel room. I laid my treasures out on the clean desk. I opened the portfolio. There it was, Lily's Lullaby. The notes were faded, the paper yellowed with age. My mother's handwriting was so familiar. It felt like she was in the room with me. I looked closer. My breath held tight in my chest, and then I saw them. They were almost invisible. Tiny, pinprick-like scratches carved into the ink itself. On the stem of the first note of the first bar, a tiny number 4. On the stem of the first note of the second bar, a 2, then a 9, then a 1. I followed the melody, my finger tracing the notes, writing down each number as I found it. It was a long sequence, a 16-digit code. I leaned back in the hotel chair, staring at the two things on the desk, the ornate brass key, and the 16-digit number scrawled on a piece of hotel stationery. I had them. I had the keys. Both of them. Brenda had sold my mother's soul for scrap. But my mother, with her brilliant, cautious, and endlessly loving foresight, had made sure her soul was locked up tight, and she had just given me, and only me, the power to open the door. The hotel room felt like a command center for a mission I was never trained for. I spent the night not sleeping, but studying. I laid the sheet music for Lily's Lullaby out on the desk under the lamp, a magnifying glass in hand that I'd asked the hotel concierge to send up. The tiny hand-carved numbers on the note stems were almost invisible, a secret language between my mother and me. I wrote them down, my hand steady, my focus absolute. 42918873551604228. 16 digits, a password, a legacy. In my other hand, I held the brass key. It was heavy, ornate, from another time. Stamped onto its base was the name of a bank I'd never heard of, the Mercantile Heritage Trust, and the number 317. It wasn't a Chase or a Bank of America. It sounded old, private, and incredibly expensive. The next morning, I didn't dress like the daughter who had fled her family home in tears. I didn't dress like the quiet art consultant who managed a gallery. I dressed like the woman my mother and grandfather had prepared me to be. I wore a simple, beautifully cut black dress, my hair pulled back, and a single, determined expression on my face. I was armed with a key, a code, and the ghost of my mother's love. The Mercantile Heritage Trust was located in a formidable granite building downtown that looked less like a bank and more like a fortress. There were no smiling tellers or garish advertisements, just a hushed marble lobby, a stern-faced security guard, and a heavy silence that smelled like old money and secrets. I walked up to the polished mahogany desk, my heart a steady, determined drum. A severe-looking woman with a tight bun looked up at me over her glasses, her expression clearly asking what someone like me was doing in a place like this. "May I help you?" she asked, her voice clipped. I didn't say a word. I simply placed the old brass key on the desk between us. Her eyes flickered down to the key, and her entire demeanor shifted. The professional disdain was replaced by a flicker of surprise, then respect. She recognized it. She picked it up. examined the number 317, and then looked back at me. Her expression unreadable now. "This way, please. Miss Jensen," she said. Using my mother's maiden name, the name tied to the account, she thought I was my mother. The thought sent a pang through my chest. She led me through a series of silent, carpeted hallways to a heavy, polished door marked Private Client Services. Inside, a man in a perfectly tailored suit stood to greet me. He was the bank manager. "Good morning," he said, his voice smooth. "We haven't had anyone access this particular box in quite some time. It is a pleasure." He was a professional, but I could see the intense curiosity in his eyes. "I have the key," I said simply. "Indeed," he nodded. "As you know, this is a dual authentication vault. We will need the account's numerical passcode to proceed." He gestured to a small, discreet keypad on his desk. I took a deep breath. This was it, the moment of truth. What if I had misremembered? What if the numbers were a red herring? My fingers were steady as I typed in the 16 digits I had transcribed from my mother's lullaby. 42918873551604428. I pressed the final key for a second. Nothing happened. The silence was absolute. And then, a small green light on the keypad blinked on, accompanied by a soft electronic chime. The manager's eyebrows shot up. He quickly masked his surprise, but I saw it. The code was correct. The door was open. "Very good, Ms. Jensen," he said, his voice now laced with a new level of deference. "If you'll follow me." He led me down another hallway, this one ending in a sight that took my breath away. It was a vault door, a massive circular door of polished steel and brass, at least 2 feet thick. It looked like something out of a movie. He used his own key in one lock, then gestured for me to use mine. I slid the old brass key into the second lock. It fit perfectly. With a series of deep, satisfying thunks and clicks, the massive bolts retracted. The manager pulled the heavy door open, revealing a wall of gleaming stainless steel boxes. He led me to a small alcove. "Number 317, he said. It wasn't a small box. It was a cabinet, 3 feet high and 2 feet wide. He used his key and my key again, and the cabinet door swung open. He pulled out a heavy metal box and placed it on a wheeled cart. "The private viewing room is just here," he said, leading me to a small sterile room furnished with only a table and a chair. He placed the box on the table. "Take as much time as you need. Press the button on the wall when you are ready for me to return." He gave me a final, curious glance and then closed the heavy door behind him. The click of the lock echoed in the silence, and then I was alone. Alone with my family's history. Alone with the secret my mother had died to protect. My hands were trembling again as I reached for the lid of the box. It wasn't locked. I lifted it off. You guys, I don't know what I was expecting. Gold bars, piles of cash. What I saw was paper, stacks and stacks of old, yellowed paper. It was a history of my grandfather's quiet genius. The top layer was stock certificates, old, beautifully printed certificates for companies he'd bought into in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Coca-Cola, Johnson & Johnson, Disney, Berkshire Hathaway. He had bought them when they were saplings and held them until they were giant, unshakable oaks. I saw property deeds for parcels of land in places that had been worthless farmland 50 years ago and were now thriving commercial centers. I saw bearer bonds, investment statements, a paper trail of a fortune built not on luck, but on patience, wisdom, and a profound understanding of long-term value. It was staggering. The sheer scale of it made my head spin. My father and Daniel, with their talk of stocks and portfolios, were children playing with pennies compared to the silent, invisible empire my history teacher grandfather had built. Beneath the financial documents were his journals, dozens of them. They were filled with his neat, spidery handwriting, detailing not just his investments, but his thoughts on the world, on politics, on history, on me. I saw my name mentioned again and again. Clara has the eye. She sees the truth of things. And then, at the very bottom of the box, I saw it, a thick, cream-colored envelope, in my mother's elegant, familiar script. It said only one word, Lily. My hands shook so hard I could barely open it. Inside was a letter, several pages long. I unfolded it. my vision blurring with tears, and I began to read my mother's final words to me. "My dearest Lily," it began, "if you are reading this, it means two things. First, that I'm gone, and for that, my sweet girl, I am so sorry. Please know that my greatest regret is not being there to see the incredible woman you will become. Second, it means that our little puzzle worked. It means you found the key, and you remembered the song. I know you must have so many questions. Let me try to answer them. Your grandfather, my father, was a remarkable man. He was also a deeply cautious one. He built this fortune for us, for you. But he feared it could be lost. He trusted me. But he saw the weakness in your father's heart. He saw your father's desire to be liked, to keep the peace, to be swayed by confident personalities. He loved your father, as do I, but we both knew he was not a strong guardian for a legacy like this. So I created this vault, this secret. I moved everything here after your grandfather passed. It was my way of protecting you. I created our little game of keys and songs, not to make it difficult for you, my love, but to make it absolutely impossible for anyone else. I knew that only you, who shared my love for that piano, who knew the feel of its keys and the melody of our song by heart, could ever unlock it. It was my way of placing this legacy directly into your hands, and your hands alone. I don't know what your life will be like when you read this. I don't know if your father will have remarried. I don't know if others will try to tell you who you are or what you are worth. But I want you to know this. This fortune is not a crutch. It is not meant to be a life of ease. It is a tool. It is freedom. It is power. The power to be whoever you want to be, without asking for anyone's permission. Use it to build a life that is truly, unapologetically your own. A life where you never, ever have to make yourself smaller to fit into someone else's world. Be brave, be bold. Travel, create, build something beautiful. Fall in love, but only with someone who celebrates your light, not someone who asks you to dim it. Be happy, my darling girl. That is all I have ever wanted for you. You are the best song I ever wrote. All my love, forever, Mom. I finished the letter, and the tears I had been holding back finally broke free. I sat there in that cold, silent, sterile viewing room, and I wept. I wept for the mother I missed so desperately. I wept for the grandfather I had never truly known. And I wept with a sense of gratitude so profound it was a physical ache in my chest. This wasn't just money. This was a suit of armor, forged for me by my mother's love and my grandfather's wisdom. It was a legacy of being underestimated. Brenda had sold my mother's memory for $100, thinking it was scrap. My father had dismissed it as just a piano. They had no idea. They had thrown away the key to an empire, and my mother had made sure that I was the only one who could pick it up. I carefully folded the letter and placed it back in the box. I took a deep breath, wiped my eyes, and stood up when I walked out of that private viewing room back into the hushed marble hall of the bank. I was a different person, the grieving. Lost daughter was gone. In her place was Lily Chen, the keeper of a legacy, the wielder of a fortune, and a woman who was about to compose a whole new song. I walked out of the Mercantile Heritage Trust and into the bright afternoon sun of New York City. The city was the same as it had been an hour ago, the same cacophony of sirens, the same river of yellow cabs, the same crowds of people rushing along the sidewalks. The world hadn't changed, but I felt like I was walking on a different plane of existence. The grief for my mother was still there, a soft, tender ache in my chest. But it was no longer a weight, it was a ballast, a grounding force, and it was now mingled with a sense of power so profound, so absolute. It was almost dizzying. My first call was not to my father. It was not to Brenda. My first call was to my lawyer. "Mark," I said when he picked up. "It's Clara, but you can call me Lily." It was a small thing, using my childhood name. The name my mother had written on the envelope, but it felt significant. Clara was the woman who managed a gallery. Lily was the keeper of a legacy. "Lily," he said, his voice as calm as ever, though I could hear the curiosity in it. "How did it go?" "It went exactly as my mother planned," I said. "Mark, I need you to assemble the full team. Financial advisors, estate planners, all of them. I'm taking active control of the Jensen Trust. Effective immediately. I want a full asset evaluation and a proposal for a new philanthropic foundation by the end of the month. Consider it done, he said without hesitation. My second call was to a high-end, climate-controlled art storage facility. My third was to the professional art movers I had researched. I have a pre-war Steinway grand piano in a warehouse in Queens, I told them. I need it picked up today, handled with extreme care, and moved to this storage facility. The invoice will be paid by CJL Holdings, LLC, an anonymous company I had set up years ago for my own private investments. The C was for Chen, my professional name, but the L was for Lily and the J was for Jensen. It was my secret history, hidden in plain sight. For the next 2 weeks, I moved with a silent, deliberate speed. The piano was safely secured. My financial team was mapping out the vast, complex landscape of my grandfather's empire, and I waited. I let my father and Brenda stew in the silence. I knew that my lack of response to the piano's disappearance would be unnerving to them. They expected tears, screaming, drama. My silence was a weapon they didn't understand. The most important move I made was a quiet one. I had Mark's firm do a title search on my childhood home. As I suspected, my father, never a great financial planner, had refinanced the house years ago and still had a substantial mortgage with a major national bank. Through a series of anonymous corporate layers, CJL Holdings bought that mortgage from the bank. It was a simple, multi-million-dollar transaction that took less than a week, just like that. I became my father's and Brenda's anonymous landlord. They had taken my mother's piano from me, so I took the house. The letter from my law firm arrived at their address a week later. It was a standard, legally required notification of a change in loan ownership. The phone call came that evening. It was my father. "Lily," he said, his voice filled with a confusion that was immensely satisfying to hear. "We got the strangest letter today. Some company, a holding company. They bought our mortgage. Do you know anything about this?" I let the question hang in the air. "I might," I said evenly. "I think we should have a meeting, the four of us, me, you, Brenda, and my lawyer, Mark." "Your lawyer? Why on earth do you need a lawyer?" "I think it's best," I said. "My lawyer's office, tomorrow at 3. I'll have his assistant send you the address." I didn't wait for him to argue. I just hung up. The boardroom at Mark's law firm was the antithesis of the DeVere mansion or my parents' cozy home. It was a sterile, intimidating space of glass and steel. With a commanding view of the city, I was there first, sitting beside Mark at the long, polished table. My father and Brenda arrived exactly at 3. They looked nervous, out of their element. Brenda was trying for an air of indignation, but it was edged with a clear anxiety. "What is the meaning of this, Lily?" My father began as soon as they sat down. "This strange letter, lawyers. It's all very dramatic. I wanted to discuss my living arrangements," I said calmly. "And by extension, yours." I looked at Brenda. "Brenda, a few weeks ago, you sold a piece of my mother's property, a piano. You sold it for $100 to a scrap dealer." She bristled. "We have been over this. It was a piece of junk taking up space." "That piece of junk," I said, my voice dropping, contained the key to my mother's family estate, an estate she kept separate from my father's finances, an estate whose existence you were completely unaware of. I slid a single piece of paper across the table. It was the top sheet of the asset evaluation from my financial team, showing only the final, staggering number. I watched as their eyes scanned it. I saw my father's face go ashen. I saw Brenda's eyes widen in disbelief. Then her face contorted in a mask of raw, ugly greed and fury. She understood immediately what she had done. "You're lying," she whispered. "Am I?" I said, "Mark, would you like to explain to my father and his wife the legal standing of the Jensen Trust?" Mark calmly and methodically laid out the facts, his voice a dispassionate drone that dismantled their entire world. When he was finished, my father just stared at me. "Lily, I don't understand. If this is true, then you're the person who now has to make some decisions about my property," I finished for him. "Which brings us to the house my mother decorated, the house I grew up in, the house where her piano belongs." I folded my hands on the table. CJL Holdings, the company that now owns your mortgage. The C is for Chen. The J is for Jensen. The L is for Lily. I own your debt, Dad. Which means, for all intents and purposes, I own my mother's house again. Brenda let out a small, strangled sound. I am not going to throw you out, I said, looking at my father, ignoring her completely. You are my father, but you are going to leave. My mother's memory will no longer be under the stewardship of a woman who valued it at $100. I laid out the terms. They had 6 months to find a new place. I would consider the mortgage paid in full a final gift to my father. After 6 months, I was moving back in, and I was starting renovations to restore the house to the way my mother had kept it. This is what happens, Dad, I said, my voice no longer cold, just filled with a deep, profound sadness. This is the consequence of your choice. You chose to keep the peace instead of protecting my mother's memory. You chose her comfort over your daughter's heart. You told me it was just a piano, but it was never just a piano. It was a test. And you both failed. 1 year later, the house is quiet now. The sterile gray walls are gone, replaced by the warm, creamy white my mother always loved. Her armchair is back in its rightful place by the fireplace. And in the corner of the living room, where for a year there was only an ugly gray sofa and a gaping wound, my mother's piano now stands. It's been beautifully restored. The gash on its leg is gone. The wood polished to a deep, rich gleam. The keys are bright and responsive. It cost me a small fortune to have it brought back to its former glory. A price I was more than happy to pay. My father and Brenda moved to a condo in Florida. He calls me sometimes. The conversations are awkward, stilted. He is a humbled man. He tries to talk about my foundation, the philanthropic work I'm doing with my grandfather's money. But there's a universe of unspoken words between us. Maybe one day, we'll find a way to build a bridge across it. Or maybe we won't. I've learned to be okay with that. Brenda, I'm told, is not handling their new, downsized life well. Tonight, the house is silent except for the sound of my own music. I sit on the familiar, worn bench, my fingers drifting over the keys. I touch the G sharp 2 octaves above middle C, feeling the tiny, almost imperceptible seam of the secret compartment. I think about the key it once held, and the song that unlocked a future I never knew was possible. Then I begin to play. It's not Chopin. It's not Debussy. It's a simple melody, a lullaby, my song. It fills the room, not with the ghost of my mother, but with her living, breathing legacy. A legacy of love, of foresight, and of quiet, unshakable strength. My mother's letter told me to build a life that was unapologetically my own. And I have. Brenda tried to sell my memory for scrap, but my mother taught me that some things are priceless. So thank you guys for listening to my story. If there's one thing I want you to take away from this, it's this: never let anyone, tell you that the things you hold sacred are junk. Your memories, your history, your heart. They are not up for negotiation. They are the keys to who you are. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more, and in the comments below, tell me about the one thing in your life that is more than just an object. I'd love to hear about it. Know your worth and never, ever let anyone else put a price on it. I'll see you in the next one.